So here's the Brian Wilson Gnome. I generally only review bobbleheads, but I made a notable exception because I thought this thing was kind of cute, and it was hugely popular. Some would argue it was probably the most popular giveaway of the entire year. Brian Wilson as a gnome. I don't know how I feel about this. I think it's cute. I did line up an hour or 2 hours early, and it was a lot of pushing and shoving. It was I was telling people it was like they were giving away life vests on the Titanic or something. I've never seen so much pushing and shoving, and the lines were huge for this silly little thing. But gnomes, unfortunately, I guess they're here to stay. I'm hoping it's not, but hey, what do you know? A gnome is a gnome. I guess they're trying to start a fad, although I'm not really buying it. But Brian Wilson as a gnome is kind of interesting. I'm sure everyone wants one. It's kind of cute. It is definitely hand-painted. It is not made by Alexander Global Promotions. They are made by some other company, BDA. I guess they call themselves Evolving Brand Merchandise, BDAinc.com. Another company made in China, as if all these little trinkets are made in China. But Brian Wilson is a gnome. Kind of interesting. It's a caricature. It's Brian Wilson with a huge black beard holding a baseball in one hand and a glove in the other. He's got bright orange shoes standing on the pitching mound. Wilson number 38, bright day-glow orange jersey. Giants logo across his chest, kind of sloppy there in the paint there. But really, I mean, these shoes, they remind me a lot of the Smurfs, except they're orange. Missing a little Nike logo, but hey, I guess you can't get everything branded. But Brian Wilson is a gnome. Kind of cute. If you want one, I'm sure you can go out there and get one. Stick around and I'll review what the differences are between a gnome and a bobblehead, right? So, a gnome and a bobblehead, slight differences. So here is a bobblehead and here is a gnome. How many remember when Brian Wilson was just a normal guy going out his business? You know how like Santiago Casillas is going about his business, nobody really cares. He didn't have a huge cult following. Women weren't screaming his name every time he did anything. Brian Wilson used to be just a normal guy. No beard, went about his business, crossed his arms, yay. Now he's just rock star guy doing Taco Bell commercials. A little weird, but still. Differences between a gnome and a bobblehead. Noticeable difference right off the bat is that gnomes are apparently hand painted in China a little sloppily. You can tell that they missed around his sunglasses there. They also missed right around the logo on his chest there with the San Francisco Giants. They missed a little bit on his arm there. So these are kind of sloppily made, slapped together there. The gnomes, they remind me of the old school bobbleheads we used to get about 10 years ago. But it's hand painted like the old school ones used to be. The bobbleheads that we're used to, that most of us have, these are not hand painted with a paintbrush. These are actually airbrush. That's why you can never replicate this look. Actually, on this Brian Wilson, you can tell that they use multiple colors of paint. On this one, if you have it, you'll notice that there's a slight pink hue to kind of bring out the cheekbones on this figurine here. Very different process, a lot more detail to it, tattooing, the arms, the coloring. There's just a lot more detail to a bobblehead versus a gnome. The other thing is, gnomes are, for the most part, a caricature. It's like a cartoon version of something. Brian Wilson as a bobblehead, we really expect him to look like Brian Wilson. He's a miniature scale, 1/50th version of the real thing. You want the eyes to be in the right size, the nose, the lips, the face, the cheekbones, the curvature of his face. As fans, we expect the bobbleheads to look a lot like our players and for them to be doing something characteristic of our favorite player. In this case, crossing his arms after a save. Unfortunately, he should also be, looking up to the sky, but you can't get everything. Whereas gnomes, slightly different. It's just a cartoon version. It doesn't actually have to look like Brian Wilson, which gives the artist a lot more freedom to just play around with it. This guy looks absolutely nothing like Brian Wilson, other than the fact that it's got a beard. For all I know, this is ZZ Top. I mean, it doesn't look anything like Brian Wilson, other than to say, oh, I'm going to put 38 and Wilson on his back, therefore it's Brian Wilson now. It's a caricature, but it doesn't have to look anything like the player that it represents. It just is stereotypes, right? We're gonna get a panda one where he's got a big fat belly, he's blowing a bubble. There'll be like a Timmy one where he's got big long hair for no reason. So gnomes are, you know, they're different. It's like a cartoon version of something, and frankly, I'd rather have a bobblehead than a gnome. But gnomes, I guess they're starting a fad. Hopefully, it doesn't take off. Because I mean, if this really does take off, there won't be as many bobbleheads, which I think is a real shame. Because there is a certain amount of artistry and appreciation in this versus this is kind of a cheap thingy. I mean, really, if you do the research, bobbleheads are going to cost somewhere around $3-4 to make on scale. You make about 20,000 of them. I guarantee these guys are probably about $1 each. Why do I know it's about $1 each? Because look at it. It's just so much easier to make. There are no limbs that stick out. There's nothing there for it to break. It's so much easier to manufacture in terms of a one-piece mold. There isn't a spring. There is an assembly process. You can be sloppy with it and still get it out the door. And there's nothing to really break. You know, some of the bobbleheads that we have, you have very thin arms, forearms, ankles, dangling all about in some kind of fancy pitching motion. This gnome, nothing. He's like the old school kind with a big, fat, stubby body. Everything is nice and thick. Unless you drop them on his arm or something, this gnome is not going to break. And so I guess it's something to give away to drive attendance. A gnome is an interesting little thing. I'm sure some guy in a back room at a Giants headquarters thought of. Say, hey, what if I was able to give you something that costs 1/2 the cost of a bobblehead, was probably 3 times easier to make, and yet would just be crazy in gangbusters and drive attendance to a weekend game. I mean, it's a win all the way around in terms of a marketing ploy. But hey, I don't like gnomes, not really. I'd prefer to have a bobblehead. It's an interesting fad, and I guess fans are going crazy for it. I'm not a huge fan of them, but I guess maybe they're here to stay. Hopefully it doesn't really take off, because I really would prefer us to continue having bobbleheads. Hopefully not 18 bobbleheads a year like we've been having, but I like Giants bobbleheads, and that's what I collect. I'm not a big fan of the gnomes, and you know, I'm probably not going to collect the Pablo or any of the others that come along. I just wanted to point out the differences. And if you're interested in getting a gnome, he is definitely out there to be had. Okay? Thanks for watching. Go Giants. Bye.